The drawing-room at Bellwood Manor had 12 candles on each side table, and one man who made them all irrelevant. And I do not mean that as praise, though he had heard it said that way so often that by now he could not tell the difference. His name was Gregory Hadleigh, Viscount Hadleigh, 37 years old, and the most tedious kind of brilliant man, the kind who knows it. He sat that January evening in the finest chair the Bellwoods could offer, in a room full of people who had come precisely for the purpose of finding him interesting, and he was bored in the manner of a man who has been bored in so many beautiful rooms for so many years, that boredom has ceased to be a feeling and become simply the weather of his inner life. You will want to know what he looked like. They always do. He was dark and well-made, with the kind of face that painters want for fallen angels, not because there was anything sinful in it, but because there was something in the eyes that had decided, some time ago, to stay very far away. He spoke 4 languages and read 2 more, and had been educated at the finest institutions England could devise, and had used every bit of it in the service of keeping the world at a distance and himself untouchable within it. He had been this way for a long time, since his father, but I will come to that. Bellwood Manor belonged for this house party to Sir Hugh and Lady Bellwood, who were wealthy and socially ambitious, and had gathered their guests the way a collector gathers a cabinet of curiosities, hoping that proximity to interesting things would make them interesting by reflection. And on this particular evening, 10 days into the party, Lord Hadleigh turned the blade of his attention toward the least consequential person in the room. Her name was Miss Beatrice Dunmore. She was 28. She was a companion. I will tell you everything about her in good time, because everything about her matters, and because what Lord Hadleigh did not know about her that evening could fill several volumes, which she had, in fact, helped to write. For the moment you need only see what he saw. A woman in a dress the colour of January fog, seated 3 chairs to the left of her employer, Lady Pembridge, stout, good-natured, magnificently oblivious, with a closed book in her lap, and a look of such careful about her to that she might have been part of the furniture. She was not part of the furniture, but she had learned over 4 years to look as though she were. Lord Hadleigh looked at her the way a man looks at something he has already decided is not worth looking at, which is a very particular kind of looking. Then he leaned toward Captain Alston, who served as a reliable audience for cruelty, and had long since made a small career of it, and said, in French, in a voice designed to carry just far enough, La petite lectrice de Lady Pembridge. Elle tient son livre comme si elle savait ce qu'il contient. C'est attendrissant, vraiment. I will translate because not everyone was raised by a father who taught them to be insulted in 3 languages, and there is no shame in that. What he said was, Lady Pembridge's little reader. She holds her book as though she knows what's inside it. It's rather sweet, really. He said it knowing she would not understand. That was the whole point. A vicious thing said in French, in an English drawing-room, understood only by the ones in on the joke cost nothing. It was, in its way, the perfect arrangement. Cruelty with no witnesses who counted. Captain Alston produced the expected smile. Lord Hadleigh turned back to his wine, and Miss Beatrice Dunmore lifted her eyes from the closed book in her lap. She lifted them slowly, the way a person looks up when they have decided to stop pretending they did not hear, a very different motion from being startled. When she spoke, she did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Vous avez raison, my lord, she said, and her French was not the French of English drawing-rooms, not 20 memorized phrases deployed with great confidence and no comprehension, but the other kind, the kind you get from living inside a language, reading in it and arguing in it and dreaming in it as a child. It came out of her like water finding level ground, unhurried and absolutely certain. Je connais très bien ce qu'il contient. Mieux, peut-être, que vous ne connaissez ce que vous venez de dire. For those following along, you are right, my lord. I know exactly what's inside it. Better, perhaps, than you know what you have just said. The room had not quite followed. Lord Hadleigh had, because Lord Hadleigh spoke excellent French, and he understood in an instant that this woman in the grey dress had not only heard him but answered him in a French that outran his own. He understood it the way you understand when you have thrown something, and it has been thrown cleanly back. He had not yet closed his mouth when she continued. She shifted into Latin with the ease of a musician moving between keys. No hesitation, no performance, just the next natural thing. It was Seneca, a line from the letters. Inimica est multorum conversatio, that the company of those who mistake cleverness for virtue is the most wearing company of all, and that two men walking in different directions cannot long keep the same pace. On its face it was not an insult, it was a quotation. The delivery made it something else entirely. Then, as though two languages were insufficient to the point she meant to make, she finished in Greek. 3 lines from Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, on the nature of men who confuse the performance of virtue for virtue itself. Her Greek was not schoolroom Greek, it was the kind you acquire young, from someone who could not stop teaching. She said it quietly, as one recites something known so long it no longer requires effort. Then she lowered her eyes to the closed book in her lap and sat very still, as she always sat, and the room rang with a silence, so complete the fire seemed to crackle louder in it. Lord Hadleigh sat with his wineglass halfway to his lips, looked at the woman in the grey dress, and felt, for the first time in a very long while, the ground shift beneath him. Now, before I take you one step further into that room, into the expression on Lord Hadleigh's face that Captain Alston would later describe to his wife as unprecedented and frankly alarming, I am going to ask something of you. Find the subscribe button for Moonlight at Bellwood and press it. It costs you nothing, and it ensures that the next story, and there is always a next story, finds its way to you the moment I am ready. If you will not, then you owe me one. I am patient about collecting, and I never forget. Come back now, not to the drawing room but further back, to understand the woman who had just met him. To understand Beatrice Dunmore, you must understand her father. Dr. Emmett Dunmore had been a physician and a philosopher, a man who wrote letters in 4 languages to colleagues on 3 continents, and had never in his life managed to keep more than £50 in his possession at once, a combination that produces a very particular kind of childhood. Trained in Edinburgh, where he absorbed medicine and moral philosophy in roughly equal measure, he spent his career not in profitable practice, but in research. The relation between mind and body, and the way the two conspired to make each other worse or better. He corresponded with men in Paris and Vienna, and near the end of his life spent 2 years at McGill College in Montreal, where the cold and the newness of the place delighted him enormously, and where Beatrice, aged 9, learned to identify 12 species of winter bird by their tracks in the snow before she had properly finished her multiplication tables. He took her everywhere. That was the essential fact of her childhood. Where a more sensible father, her aunt said as much, often, would have left a motherless girl with relations and gone alone to his work, Dr. Dunmore could not contemplate it. His wife had died when Beatrice was 4, and the grief had settled into him like cold into stone, and the one thing he could not release was his daughter, so she went with him. Edinburgh, London, 2 years in Paris, where she learned her French wrong and then correct, a year in Vienna where German came in quietly, the way languages do when one is small, and the world simply enters through the ears, and the 2 years in Montreal, which she loved past all expectation, where the St. Lawrence froze solid in January and cracked open again in enormous grinding sheets each April. She had stood on the riverbank with her father and thought it the most astonishing sound she had ever heard, all that weight, all that stillness, and then the first slow splitting of the ice. He taught her Latin at 7 and Greek at 10, not because he had a plan for either, but because he could not stop teaching any more than a river stops running. He did not believe, and she understood only later how radical this was, that a daughter's mind was a smaller or less capable instrument than a son's. The mind was the mind, he said, and the world's habit of furnishing some minds and leaving others bare was the world's error, not the mind's limitation. "A mind is a mind, Beatrice," he told her once in Montreal, standing at the edge of the ice. "God did not make a smaller version for daughters. He only made a smaller world for them to use it in. That is the world's fault, and not his, and not yours. Do not let it become yours." She was 22 when he died, as he had lived, with a great deal of learning and no money at all. In the cold weeks afterward, Beatrice discovered the precise dimensions of the world he had always warned her about. She had Latin and Greek and French and German, and a scientific education most men at the College of Physicians could not match, and not one thing the world would pay a woman for. She could not practice medicine. She could not stand for a fellowship. She had helped her father write his last 3 papers, had written most of the final one herself, on nervous sensation and the treatment of chronic pain, still cited in Edinburgh and Paris. And she could not acknowledge it, because the name on the papers was his, and every door that might have used her hung the same name, never hers. What she had, on the open market, was exactly what any genteel and penniless young woman possessed: the qualification to be a governess or a companion, and nothing else in the world. She had been Lady Pembridge's companion for 4 years now. Lady Pembridge was warm and pleasantly vague, and genuinely fond of Beatrice in the way comfortable women are fond of things that make them comfortable. She did not believe Beatrice had any particular interior life, which meant she did not resent her for having one. Beatrice fetched the shawls and read the letters aloud and summarized the novels. Lady Pembridge lacked patience to finish herself, and she folded the whole roaring library of herself, the medicine, the philosophy, the 4 living languages, and the 2 dead ones, into a back room of her soul, and told herself she had made her peace with it. She had not. You do not make peace with the silencing of the thing you were built to do. You only make a kind of treaty with the silence, and treaties, as I have had occasion to observe from this side of the fire, are only ever one provocation away from breaking. Now come back with me to the drawing-room, to the ringing silence after the Greek. Lord Hadleigh sat with his wine-glass raised and his mouth slightly open. The 3 or 4 people in the room who spoke French had understood precisely what had happened. The elderly retired physician by the window had followed the Latin, and then the Greek, his expression the particular, unguarded, twinkling variety of a man watching something go exactly as it should. And Lord Hadleigh did something no one in the room had ever seen him do. He laughed. Not the cold laugh, not the controlled one deployed for effect, but a real laugh. Short, startled, wrenched out of him the way truth gets wrenched from people at the moment they least expect it. He looked at the woman in the grey dress, and his face did something Captain Alston would spend the rest of the evening trying to describe, and never quite manage. It became, briefly, simply genuine. "I beg your pardon," he said, in English clearly, so the whole room heard the concession. He did not know her name. It had not, until 30 seconds ago, occurred to him to learn it. "Dunmore," said Beatrice. "Miss Dunmore." "Miss Dunmore." He inclined his head, and it was the real thing, the bow one gives when one has been fairly and completely defeated. "My French, it seems, is adequate for conversation and insufficient for provocation." "Your French is very good," she said. "I object only to the sentiment it carried." Something shifted in his expression. The laugh receded, and what it left behind was quieter and less familiar to him. "Yes," he said, "increasingly, so do I." He did not sleep that night. This was unusual. Lord Hadleigh had long since disciplined his thoughts into an order that permitted sleep, and he lay awake in the good guest room at Bellwood, conducting the sort of examination that only arrives at 3 in the morning. When the defences are thin, the conclusion he reached was not the one he expected. He had been bested, completely and fairly, in the one arena where he had believed himself for 37 years unbeatable. And the emotion that came with this was not, as logic insisted it ought to be, humiliation. It was relief. He turned that over for a long time because it made no sense. Why should a man feel relief at being defeated? And slowly, in the small hours, with January pressing at the windows, he found the answer. He had been the cleverest person in every room he had entered for as long as he could remember, and he had been so profoundly alone in that cleverness, so quietly, completely, bone-deep alone, that some part of him had long since given up hope that anyone existed who could meet him where he actually was. Anyone who spoke the same languages, all of them. And tonight, in a grey dress, from a closed book, a woman had looked up and met him in 3. The ice had cracked, just slightly, just enough to let in a sliver of something that felt, against all reason, warmer than anything he had felt in years. He found her in the library the next morning. He had gone there himself, because the Bellwood Library was the one room the rest of the house reliably avoided, books being, to the Bellwood set, rather like religion, a thing one approved of in principle and avoided in practice. He had not expected to find it occupied, but there she was, in the window seat with the early light, coming in, grey and clean across her face, deep in a book she was clearly not reading for the first time. The book was in Latin. He stood in the doorway long enough to see that she did not hear him, that she was genuinely elsewhere, inside whatever she was reading, her lips moving slightly the way lips do when words are almost known by heart, and he felt the ice shift again, a long, slow settling. "It is considered rude," she said without looking up, "to stand in a doorway watching a person read. I believe it falls somewhere between impolite and presumptuous. I believe I have already established some difficulty with questions of manners," he said, and came into the room. She looked up. Whatever she had expected, it was not him making a joke at his own expense. He saw the recalibration happen in her face, the small, careful reordering of what she had assumed. "What are you reading?" She turned the book so he could see the spine. Galen, a medical text, 2nd century, on the functions of the body's systems. "Of course it is," he said. Then, because he could not help it, in the original naturally, not the Latin translation, the actual Greek. "The Latin translation has errors," she said simply. "My father identified them in a paper in 1819. Small errors, but they compound." "Your father published on Galen." "My father published on a great many things. I helped him with most of them." She said the next part quietly, as one states a fact, without asking to be believed. "I wrote the last one myself. Under his name, of course, because that was the only name that would get it read." Lord Hadleigh sat down. Not too close. He was not a fool about all things, even when he was a considerable fool about others. "Tell me," he said. And Beatrice Dunmore made a decision. 4 years of silence, of folded-away gifts, of eyes kept down and Latin kept locked. The safe thing, the wise thing, the thing dependence had trained into her bones, was to deflect, to say something modest and forgettable and let the Viscount wander off. She knew how to do that. She had done it for 4 years. But she was tired. She had been tired for a long time, and there was something in the way he had said in the original, naturally, not with mockery, but with a kind of wondering recognition, the way a person sounds when they find, against all expectation, another creature who inhabits the same obscure corner of the world they thought only they could see, that made her open the door instead. She told him about her father, about Edinburgh and Paris and the 2 years in Montreal where the St. Lawrence froze solid in January and cracked open again in spring with a sound like the world rearranging itself. About the letters in 4 languages and the notebooks full of observation, the long evenings when her father argued philosophy across the dinner table and expected her to argue back, and she had, and he had been delighted, and she understood only later what a rare and radical thing that delight was. About the paper on nervous sensation that she had written, and he had signed, still cited in Edinburgh under his name, which no one living knew was hers. She told him about the 4 years after, without dramatizing them. She had her father's habit of stating facts without requesting sympathy, which made them somehow more affecting than drama would have. "The Bellwood Library," she said at the end of it, is mine for 1 hour each morning. Before Lady Pembridge rings, I read what I like. It is a pause, brief and almost involuntary. The 1 hour of the day I am entirely myself. Lord Hadleigh was quiet for a long moment. That, he said at last, is the most enraging thing I have heard in years. It is not particularly, it is simply ordinary. There are women like me everywhere. Minds built for something the world will not permit them to do. You have simply never thought to notice us, because we have learned that being noticed costs more than it is worth. She looked at him steadily. I broke that rule last night. I am not yet certain it was wise. It was, he said with a force that surprised them both, extraordinary. He retreated after that, back into wit, because 15 years of armor does not fall off in a single morning, but the wit was different now. Offered, not aimed. He picked up a book from the side table and quoted a line in Latin and raised an eyebrow in a challenge. And Beatrice answered it and added another. And within 10 minutes they were deep in the kind of conversation neither had had in years. Two people who did not have to explain themselves, and the unmistakable air of a woman who could build sentence by sentence on a shared foundation of everything written, who could fence and laugh and reach together, towards something neither could reach alone. It was the finest morning Beatrice had spent since Montreal. When Lady Pembridge's bell rang from above, she rose. Lord Hadleigh rose too and stopped her at the door, and said a thing that frightened him even as he said it, because it was true. And the truth was the thing he had spent 15 years most carefully refusing to speak aloud. I have been the cleverest person in every room I have entered for as long as I can remember, he said. I have never been so glad to be wrong about that as I was last night, and I have never been so glad to keep being wrong about it as I have been this morning. A pause. I should like to be wrong about it a great deal more, if you will permit it. That depends, said Beatrice, on whether you can learn to use your cleverness for something other than keeping people at a safe distance. Because that is what you do with it. I have watched you for 10 days, Lord Hadleigh, and you are not cold, you are barricaded, and you have mistaken one for the other. And it has made you the loneliest at this entire party. I will talk with you. I will argue with you gladly. But I will not help you build the wall any higher. I have spent 4 years behind a wall of my own, and I came out from behind it last night, and I find I would very much rather not go back. She went to fetch the shawl. Lord Hadleigh stood in the library with a book of Galen in his hands, looking at the closed door, and understood that he had just been seen. All the way down, past the title and the reputation and the famous cold competence, to the frightened and walled-up and lonely man at the center of it. Being seen, which he had spent 15 years ensuring could never happen, did not feel the way he had always imagined it would. It felt like the morning light through the library window, like the first slow splitting of the ice. I will not pretend to you that it was simple after that, because it was not, and the not-simpleness is the part most true to life. Lord Hadleigh came to the library every morning. It became their hour, belonging to neither the house party nor the watching, murmuring guests. In those mornings he was wonderful, sharp and warm and funny, with the kind of humor that makes you feel quick yourself instead of small. Beatrice found herself laughing in ways she had forgotten she could. But outside those mornings, in the drawing room, at dinner, in the long social evenings when the whole party was watching, he was again and again the old Hadleigh, cold, precise, reaching for the cutting remark the moment anyone came near. Each time it happened, it hurt her more, because she knew now what lay underneath, and watching him barricade himself in public after he had let her in each morning felt like watching someone choose, over and over, to walk back into a burning house while the door stood open. It came to a head 3 evenings later, when Miss Corinna Ashby, 18, very golden, very nervous, brought to Bellwood by her uncle with every expectation of catching a viscount, was prevailed upon to play the pianoforte. She played it adequately, made one small error in the middle section, and looked up in the manner of a young woman who has practiced for a fortnight and is terrified of failing in front of the people who matter most. Lord Hadleigh, cornered by the evening, irritated by the positioning, reaching as he always reached for the weapon, said something precise and perfectly timed in French about the middle section, and the four people who understood laughed, and Miss Ashby, who did not speak French, understood the laughter and the tone well enough, and went the colour of the roses on the mantelpiece. She was 18. She had been doing her best. Beatrice set down her cup. "It is a strange thing," she said into the silence that followed, her voice clear and certain in the way it had been in this same room 3 nights before. "What wit costs the person wielding it?" The room went still. "Miss Ashby will have forgotten that mistake by morning," she continued, not performing for the room now, speaking to Lord Hadleigh directly, the way he had once spoken to her, across a crowd that could not follow. But a man who has spent 15 years using one of the finest minds I have ever encountered as a mechanism for keeping other people at a safe distance. That does not heal easily. It compounds. Every time he reaches for the blade instead of the hand, the wall goes up a little higher, until eventually the wall is all there is. She paused. "I have watched you do it every evening for 10 days. Every morning I sit with the man who knows he is doing it. Every evening I watch him go into the drawing room and do it again. That is the saddest thing I know about you. And you are capable of better. I have seen that you are capable of better, and it is becoming unbearable to watch you choose not to be." She rose, curtsied to Lady Bellwood. "Forgive me, I have spoken out of my place." She left. Behind her the candles burned on. Miss Ashby was looking at the door through which Beatrice had departed with the expression of who has been defended by the last one they expected, and does not yet know what to do with it. Captain Alston was studying the ceiling with great attention, and Lord Hadleigh sat at the centre of the room with everything she had said settling into him like cold into stone. Slowly and completely past the point of being dislodged. 2 days later, his brother arrived. Philip Hadleigh was 4 years older than Gregory, and considerably colder, the way permafrost is colder than ice. A man of considerable legal reputation and considerable social influence, he had received, through the network of correspondence he maintained with the patient thoroughness of a man who considers information a form of property. A full account of events at Bellwood, his younger brother out of countenance, his younger brother in the library, each morning with a companion, his younger brother publicly rebuked by that same companion and appearing. Witnesses had noted with deep unease to have deserved it. Philip had come to put a stop to whatever this was. He was subtle about it. He was always subtle. He waited until the drawing-room was well assembled, the audience well gathered, and then turned to Beatrice directly, itself a calculated slight, a great man stooping to notice a hired companion only to flatten her, and said, pleasantly in French, "I am told you are something of a linguist, Miss Dunmore, and a reader of medical texts no less. How very practical. In your position one must cultivate whatever useful qualities one can." He let the pause before useful qualities do its work, the pause that suggested, without the risk of actually saying, that a penniless companion who made herself fascinating to an unmarried viscount was engaged in a kind of transaction, and that everyone in the room understood the currency. It was masterfully done. Beatrice felt the room hold its breath, waiting to see her flush and shrink. She did not. She looked at Philip, at the deliberate pleasantness of his face, the calculation running precisely behind it, and understood with the recognition of one armoured creature looking at another, exactly what she was seeing, and where Lord Hadleigh had learned his coldness. She understood what a man looked like, who had chosen the wall so completely and for so long that he had forgotten there had ever been anything else. She did not reach for Latin. She did not reach for Greek. She had learned something in these 10 days at Bellwood that she had not before this known how to say. "You are right," she said in plain and quiet English, so the whole room could understand and no one could hide behind the language. "I have made myself useful. I am glad to be of use, but I think you mean something else by the word, and I will address that plainly, since we are all adults here. I speak several languages. I read medicine and philosophy. My father gave me these things, and the world has never found a formal use for them, and I have spent 4 years trying not to let that matter. But they are mine, Mr. Hadleigh. They are the company I keep when I am alone, which in my position is often. They are my father's voice, still present years after his death. They are the one thing the world has not been able to take from me, though it has taken nearly everything else. I do not use them to make myself anything to anyone. I use them to remain someone to myself. That is the whole of it. You meant to shame me just now, she said, gently, almost kindly. Your brother tried the same thing in this room 3 nights ago. I will tell you what I told him. It is a remarkable family talent, the use of brilliance as a means of keeping everyone at a distance. I think it was taught to you, as it was taught to him, by someone who had themselves been taught it. I am sorry for that. I think it has cost you both more than either of you has ever stopped to calculate, but I will not be made small by it, and I will not, whatever it costs me, help either of you believe that the wall is the same thing as safety. It is not. It is only loneliness with better manners. A chair scraped back. Lord Hadleigh had risen. The room turned. Philip turned. The air between the brothers had the particular quality that exists between 2 people who share a long history, and only one of them wants to speak of it. Beatrice saw the old reflex move through Lord Hadleigh's face, the 15-year habit of retreat, of cold wit deployed as a shield, of saying something that would let him step back from the edge without having to jump. She watched him consider it. She watched him breathe. He crossed the room, past Captain Alston, past the retired physician by the window, who watched him with an expression of careful, quiet hope, past Lady Bellwood and the golden, bewildered Miss Ashby, and came to where Beatrice stood and stopped beside her, not behind her, beside her, which was in that room, in that moment, the plainest possible answer a man could give. He looked at his brother. "Philip," he said, his voice steady and clear, in a way it had not always been, even when it had seemed composed. "You taught me what our father taught you, that the only safety was in being beyond reach, that warmth was weakness, that the cleverest response to a world that could hurt you was to become the thing doing the hurting first." He paused. "I believed it for 37 years. I have been very clever and very cold and very untouchable, and I have been—" Something moved through his voice, not quite controlled. "So lonely, Philip, for so long that I had stopped being able to name it, until a woman in a grey dress answered me in 3 languages, and named it for me, clearly and without cruelty, which is a harder thing to do than most people ever manage. I am not going to do it anymore," he said. "I am setting it down. Here tonight, in front of everyone, which appears to be the only way a thing like this can be laid down, in the open, where one cannot quietly take it back." He turned to Beatrice, and whatever lived in his expression in that moment was something the assembled guests would describe for a long time afterward, variously as raw and unexpected. And, in Lady Bellwood's account to her sister 3 days later, as rather the most honest thing I have seen a man do in a drawing-room in all my years of hosting. "Miss Dunmore," he said, "I spoke French to dismiss you, certain you would not follow. You answered me in 3 languages and brought the whole careful structure down. I have spent 10 mornings being grateful for it, and roughly as many evenings proving I had not yet learned anything, which is, I am aware, an unimpressive record. I would like to improve it. If you have the patience for the project, I cannot promise the wall comes down all at once, but I can promise I am done building it higher." Something that was almost, the warmth she had seen in the library moved across his face. "I believe I will need an instructor." "Instructors," said Beatrice, "generally expect their students to do the reading." "I am an excellent reader," he said. "You have seen my library." "I have seen you use your library to avoid people," she said. "That is not quite the same thing." "No," he said, "it is not. I know the difference now." They were married in the spring, which gave the world a winter to talk, and the world made thorough use of the time. A viscount marrying a penniless companion was considered eccentric at best and irresponsible at worst, and the world said so at considerable length, as the world does when it disapproves of a happiness it did not arrange. The world was wrong, as it so often is. It saw a great man making an impractical choice. It did not see what had actually occurred. Two people who had built walls around themselves for very different reasons, finding in each other the one mind in the world that could meet their own, and doing the bravest thing available to either of them, laying the walls down and letting themselves be known. Philip Hadleigh did not attend the wedding. He came around eventually, slowly and with considerable reluctance, by small and grudging degrees over the better part of 2 years. Beatrice was patient. She had been patient for a long time, and she understood, better than most, what it costs to carry something heavy for a very long while, and finally locate the place to set it down. Miss Corinna Ashby, freed from the exhausting labor of catching a viscount, who had never once thought of being caught, discovered over the following season that there were a number of things she had never been permitted to want for herself. A revelation received in her mother's less enthusiasm than one might have hoped. She married a cheerful young doctor, one who happened to mention at their first dinner that he had read a paper on nervous sensation published in Edinburgh and found it entirely transformative, and who went a very interesting colour when Beatrice told him, quietly, who had written it. As for Lord Hadleigh and his countess, they had a library. A real one, the kind Beatrice's father would have wept to walk into, with windows on 3 sides and more books than either of them would live to finish, and a particular window seat in the east corner, where the morning light came in first and stayed longest. They read Galen together. They argued about the translations. He had opinions about the Latin edition. She was right that it had errors, and he knew she was right and argued anyway, for the sheer pleasure of being corrected by someone who would not use it against him. A new pleasure, and one he found he could not get enough of. He never used his cleverness as a weapon again. I will not tell you the edge left him. A mind like that does not blunt, and she would not have wanted it to. But he turned it, all of it, from the work of exclusion to the work of connection, toward her, and toward the occasional, entirely deserved dismantling of genuine pomposity, which Beatrice enjoyed considerably, and told him was at long last a proper use of a fine education. And she, for the first time since the ice cracked open on the St. Lawrence in the spring of her 9th year, opened the back room of herself and left the door wide. The medicine, the philosophy, the 4 living languages and the 2 dead ones, all of it came out into the morning light, and was not feared, and was not resented. It was loved, precisely and specifically for being exactly what it was. He had spoken French to dismiss her, certain she would not follow. She had answered in 3 languages, and he spent the rest of his life grateful that she had. And that, my dear friends, is where I leave them. In the morning light at Hadleigh, 2 people who once sat alone behind their separate walls, reading the old words to each other the way you read to someone you have decided to keep. Not to perform, not to impress, but to share what you love, and to be known all the way down to the foundation of yourself, and to find at last that being known is not the catastrophe the frightened heart always imagined it would be. It is in the end the only thing that was ever going to thaw it. You have kept me company through a long winter at Bellwood, through the slow and necessary cracking of a great deal of very old ice, and I would not have told this one without you, on the other side, if it has given you something. A warmth, a recognition, a small and stubborn wish to bring out whatever gift you have been keeping, folded away in the back room of your own soul, and let it into the light. Then subscribe to Moonlight at Bellwood, because there are many more of these by my fire, and every one of them is told for exactly the person who needs it most. And if you will not, well, you know what I am going to say. You owe me one. I am patient about collecting, and I never ever forget.